Hello and welcome to Malaysia. I'm Haslinda Amin. 25 years after first becoming Deputy Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim is entering the final stretch of what's been a long and treacherous journey. If the current Prime Minister keeps his word, and Mahathir Mohamad says he will, Anwar is set to assume power around May 2020. Anwar's rise comes from an unlikely alliance, and nothing is certain in Malaysian politics. The coalition he formed with Mahathir Mohamad to win the Malaysian election was born from a difficult past. Anwar spent 10 years behind bars, twice jailed at the behest of Prime Minister Mahathir in 1999, and most recently, Najib Razak, the former PM who's now facing trial over the 1MDB scandal. So, how would Anwar's Malaysia look if and when Mahathir hands over power as promised 2 years after the election victory? This is a conversation with Malaysia's Prime Minister in waiting, Anwar Ibrahim. People say it is Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister in waiting, and that he could be waiting forever. Can you shed some light on when do you think you will take power?
Politics is full of cynicism, but as far as the transition is concerned, things are quite settled. The ruling party coalition has made the agreement and understanding will be observed. And I don't think it's an issue of speculation. We can stop it, but it's not only my position or Mahathir's, but I think the ruling coalition is stuck to a decision, and there's no sign that they're changing that.
How long are you willing to wait? Mahathir says 2 years, 3 years. He even said maybe. Is May 2020 the date to be looking out for?
There's an understanding that it should be around that time, but I don't think I should be too petty about the exact month. But there is this understanding that he will resign at the appropriate time, and I should assume.
Dr. Shri, investors need to know. They're waiting to invest in Malaysia, but without any clarity, it is difficult to make long-term decisions.
Now, let me be more assertive on this. Firstly, for the investors, is the fundamentals is strong. A clear economic direction and policy, which you are trying after this such initial turbulence. And the issue of transition is also quite clear. I mean, I've met many of them asking whether it will happen. I said there's no reason to think otherwise. So there is clear, definite decision being made, and I think we should move on. And we're not talking about a new government. We're talking about a transition to a new leader, observing the same broad policies, but more assertive on certain issues, of course.
Before we talk about the policies, can you categorically say that you will be Prime Minister 100%? There have been names floating around, Amin Ali, who is your deputy, also Mahathir's son, Mukriz. Can you categorically say you will be in power?
Well, as far as the leadership, the decision of Pakatan Harapan leaders, coalition, the understanding prior to elections, the consensus announced and reached by the coalition, they're settled. There's no any sign of any party introducing or promoting or lobbying for other names. This does not stop individuals with ambition with their own designs. This is, to me, quite irrelevant. Whether it has been discussed, whether it has given some legitimacy, the answer is no.
What have you been doing to prepare to be the Prime Minister?
I spend hours weekly in my office, the transition office, to listen to reports, to meet ministers, to meet public servants, to meet members of the private sector, listen to them. And it's more a learning curve again, to understand the issues and go down to the public in town hall meetings and public meetings to listen to their grievances, the frustrations. Of course, there is this rising expectations because, this is a spectacular sort of a victory due to lots of promises. And of course, we cannot able to deliver in a short pace of time. But we are determined. There has been changes in the judicial reform, parliamentary reform, media, but of course it's not complete. And particularly in the economy, I think now we have to focus, make sure that the economics and the economic remain the fundamental issue and policy.
Malaysians are unhappy. There's economic malaise. There has been a lack of reform, they say, bold reforms. When you come to power, what policies can be expected? How different will they be from the current government?
No, the criticism, it differs between the urban elites who like to see the reform in terms of institutional reform, governance, which I share, but also realize the vast majority of our population, the B40, the rural folks, the hinterland, they would expect, and even the urban poor, again back to bread and butter issues, which means the country must refocus itself in making sure that we remain attractive to investments, domestic and foreign. Whatever policies, adjustments required must be done, because only through growth that we can ensure a fair distribution of wealth.
Talk to us about shared prosperity. Malaysia has talked about wanting to achieve shared prosperity. How will that be achieved?
No, we have seen the new economic policy and its relative success in terms of social mobility. But we're also seeing grinding poverty. In fact, it is of course of grave concern lately with this Ashton United Nations report that suggests that the poverty, real poverty, is far higher than what was recorded by the government. And I think we should take an open view, welcome this, relook at it, the parameters, the standards that we have imposed in the past or decided upon, and I think move on. Grinding poverty is a problem. Urban poverty is a recently or a new phenomenon which we need to address. Then there's of course gross inequality. It's not only inter-race, but it's also intra, the very rich and the very poor. And so the policy adjustments must be sure to propel the economy, but at the same time to be equally concerned about the problems of the poor.
Could it also mean higher taxes for the rich?
Not necessarily. I mean, I have never, even all my years as finance minister, talk about taxation prior to looking at the issue of governance. The wastage, the redundancy, the corruption, the leakages. Now let us deal with this effectively. We have very strong pronouncements against corruption. Okay, we have really acted against the corrupt practices of the past. My position, as I think Tun Mahathir remarked too recently, that the corruption must also address the present inadequacies, the present excesses of the present government. Sedition law as it stands now cannot be defended.
When you were first released from prison, you said that you need to win back the vote of the Malays.
Affirmative action is a must for all races, but it must be able to empower them.
You talked about corruption. How about things like the sedition law, Linus's license? Do you see yourself repealing that?
Well, on Linus, I've given my public position that we should relook at the issues because we want to attract investments. We don't want to cause concern among the investors. But the priority must also be public welfare. If people are convinced and if there are incontrovertible evidence to suggest that the issues of public safety is a concern, then we must relook at it. That is why I'm saying that we need to relook at it. On the issue of Sedition Act, there is this concern that they will allow a free flow of criticism against the rulers, against the Malay rights. So we will have to relook at it, but sedition law as it stands now cannot be defended. And that has been our position in the past, extensive discussions, debates, and there was a consensus. And I think we have to honor that.
Dr. Sri, what's your assessment of how the current cabinet has done? Has it done enough?
Well, of course, objectively, one would say they should do more, but I think must give some credit to them that they are trying to at least navigate out of the initial storm. We, of course, notice that some lack the experience to take first few months to settle down, and people are getting impatient, but you understand that. But overall, they have tried, and many of them have done remarkably well.
Is there a need for a cabinet reshuffle?
That's purely the discretion of the present Prime Minister.
How would your team look like?
Well, it has to be among the key leaders of the parties and the coalition. But I think the focus should be, men and women of integrity, professional standing, and capacity for hard work. And more so, very key to my mind is ethics and governance.
By the time you take over power, you'll have three and a half years perhaps to fulfill the promises which have not been kept to the people. What would be your priority, and can you win back the trust in that time frame?
Let me clarify. Firstly, some of the promises has been fulfilled. Key issues like in terms of, as I said, media or judiciary or even anti-corruption laws. These were not easy given the background of our culture of corruption in the past. But we have to move on. As I see it, again, issue of the economy. And I think my priority would be the economy. Whatever it takes, whatever is required to prepare the economy, to attract investments, and at the same time to show enough empathy and concern for grinding poverty and gross inequality, which cannot be accepted or tolerated.
When you were first released from prison, you said that you need to win back the vote of the Malays who are not buying into the Pakatan Harapan coalition. Do you think you've managed to win the hearts and minds of the Malays at this point in time, 1 year on?
Well, there are, of course, concerns here. The Malays generally, is contrary to the position prior to the elections, the non-Malays felt they were under siege or threatened or discriminated against. Now they have this suddenly change that now that the non-Malays become the supremo and the Malays being marginalized. We'll go back to the facts. Nothing substantive have changed in terms of some sort of a Malay dominance in the power polity. But we must accept the fact that after 62 years of independence, we cannot have a Malay regime. It has to be a multiracial, multi-religious character in this country. So we need to then address these issues and allay the Malay fears and concerns. I've been going down, and I think people are willing to accept. It is not something that they have made up their minds and say that this government is purely a Chinese government. No, they don't. But they need to be reassured. And again, the issues to my mind is bread butter issues. When they feel that the issues of the poor are not being addressed, possibly to an extent it is right, because we don't have the funds given the economic scenario of the present. And the manner we disburse funds is not like it was in the past, where it breeds dependency syndrome. You give to the poor not enough to free themselves from poverty, but enough to make sure that they survive and totally dependent upon you. Our thinking need to change. The assistance is required. affirmative action is a must for all races, but it must be able to empower them and free them from of poverty.
Can you win the Malay votes having a Malaysia for Malaysians as a policy? And if elections were held tomorrow, can you win more votes than you did before?
I've won my constituencies in Penang and Negeri Sembilan, vast majority of the Malays are with me, and many constituencies too. Although overall, given the political landscape and the influence of the Islamic Party, and now with the merger or coalition or marriage of UMNO and PAS, we have to, of course, to relook at the whole approach. But I think generally the Malays, given the information and understanding, would not resort to extremist, racist or religious bigotry.
Do you think the issue of 1DB has been dealt sufficiently?
I think more need to be done.
Prime Minister Mahathir has said that he wants to recover $7 billion from Goldman.
We should pursue this vigorously.
Part of the reason for the economic malaise has to do with the escalating national debt, and that has to do with 1MDB. Do you think the issue of 1DB has been dealt sufficiently?
Well, both the finance minister, the attorney generals have done their best, not only using local expertise but also international multilateral support. But it is so huge, and as remarked by, I think, the Economist, is one of the biggest financial fiasco scandal involving any government in modern times. So I think more need to be done. They need to continue to pursue. They are doing that. I am not privy to all the reports, but then I've been kept informed partly what is being done.
You said before that investigations should be expanded to include even the Battersea project and the ERLC, which is the railway project with China. Are you not satisfied with how corruption is being dealt with or investigated?
Well, I, of course, have stronger views on this, but we cannot deny the fact that something's been done. Even the ACRL project has been renegotiated. But now that we have new evidence in court to suggest that this was part of the YMDB deal, then certainly you can reopen some aspects of these terms of agreement and understanding to ensure that it is really clean and transparent.
Prime Minister Mahathir has said that he wants to recover $7 billion from Goldman on top of the assets that have been sent overseas. Is that the amount that you have come to as well? Do you share that figure?
I've said it in the forum with you, remember, in Singapore, very strong on that, in front of the Goldman Sachs chief. But I think the figure have to be left to the authorities to decide and compute. But certainly I'm more willing to share the amount, so that the amount must be really substantial. It's not the losses, but also the effect, the negative effect, and the burden that we have to shoulder of all these years. And we should pursue this vigorously.
I want to touch on foreign policy. If you take the South China Sea, Malaysia has pretty much taken a conciliatory approach, not wanting to upset China in the South China Sea, preferring instead to observe the code of conduct. Shouldn't Malaysia adopt a more rigorous approach in defending its own sovereignty?
We certainly need to take adequate measures to defend our national security in all, and therefore we need to be more assertive, yes. but I think the manner we deal with countries, we need diplomatic skills, but we must continue to be at the forefront in terms of negotiations. And it's not only with China, with our neighbors. Look at the Haze issue, for example. I mean, all these issues should be done, but assertive, firm, and where we are on the right track, we should be more clear in our position. And I think for now, Malaysians has not been too conciliatory. Our position is known. We're not that combative, of course. Doesn't sound aggressive, but certainly we have expressed some form of displeasure if our interests are not protected.
You touch on the Haze. It is an issue that's permeated the whole region, blanketed the whole region for decades now. Why isn't Malaysia and the likes of Singapore putting more pressure on Indonesia to deal with the issue that's costing governments billions of dollars?
We should feel outraged, and I consider this an ecological warfare. It requires government to be more assertive. We are talking about schools, children suffering. We are talking about hundreds of schools being closed, all outdoor activities cancelled. This is not a small matter. It is affecting essentially millions of our people. And at a cost to the people. They have to buy masks, they go to see doctors, they go to have eye drops all the time. And I think, and this has been going on for decades. We should be more stronger. I mean, regardless whether it's Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia. I mean, dealing with these big companies. Why are we not making sure that they be held accountable? At least bear part of the cost. And not considering this as a natural disaster, which is happening almost every year, and coincidentally, the oil palm estates and the peat soil, which emits very high amount of carbon, affecting the lives of people. So I think...
How far would you go? What would you do?
Well, it reflects all legal muscle and that at our disposal. I mean, also very clear with the companies. Look, I mean, you register a few 100 million profits every year. Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. I mean, why are they being protected? Or at least, why are we a bit too soft in dealing with them? And I think I should support the position that the governments should do to ensure that this should not occur. I mean, there is no reason why we should allow this to happen almost every year at the same time and essentially around the same places, and nothing can be done in this age, and this is unacceptable.
Dr. Sri, just one final question before we let you go. Back in 2013, when you stood for election, people said it was your final bid to be Prime Minister. 6-7 years on, here you are on the cusp of being the Prime Minister. Does that position mean more to you now than ever before?
As I always said, you have grown wiser. You're taking the time to learn. You become more patient. You have more compassion. And you realize that after all, you have to do the best, dedicate yourself to serve your country and your people.
How does it feel to be in that position in 5 seconds?
I should say, thank God.
So there you have it, the thoughts of Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister in waiting. From Malaysia, I'm Haslinda Amin. Thanks for watching.